Hi there. So I just want to share a few thoughts on Module 4. Great discussion, by the way. I'm loving the insight that all of you are sharing. Um, a few things. One, Daniel summarized it well in the first post. He talked about the emotional part of it. He talked about the risk-taking aspect of it. And one person that really stands out in terms of research into math education is Dan Mayer. If you haven't heard the name before, we will talk about him again in the modules to come. I think that you'll enjoy what he has to say. But his main tenet is the fact that he feels that in math class, it's our job to start a fight, to pin friend against friend, to have students argue about something, anything, and then try to draw the math out of it. So, for example, you post one of those "which one doesn't belong" questions that I showed you in the last video, and then you pick two of the students that are responding, and you ask them to argue or to debate about which one is actually right, or you even put up two of the answers and you have the class split. Whoever thinks that this is the right answer, go here. Who thinks this is the right answer, go here, and prepare a debate. It's not going to be like an English debate. It's just a way to get them into the math, to get them a little bit emotionally charged and emotionally invested. I also wanted to talk about, a lot of people brought up the aspect of being physical and kids moving around in the classroom. That's a great idea. There's a lot of movement coming out of Ottawa, a few schools there that are working with something called vertical non-permanent surfaces. It's a really fancy name for a vertical whiteboard. The idea is that every student in your class has one that they stand up at and work on, or you can have a pair of students work at a vertical whiteboard. There's a lot of reasons for this. One, students are standing, which promotes their alertness. It promotes their blood flow. Two, it creates a community of collaborative mathematicians. If students are stuck, they can just peek over at somebody else and they can get going. In school, we call that cheating, and in the adult world, we call it collaborating, right? Like, you're allowed to look at somebody else's idea to get started on your work, right? And the thing about them being risk takers, if you ask one student to come up to the board, I mean, that's kind of like a death sentence to a teenager. But if all of them are doing it, there's something about them being risk takers in a group, right? You saw that in one of the videos. They're risk takers, but if they have backup. So if they're all working on vertical whiteboards, then it's not a big deal, right? Because they're all doing it with each other. And finally, I wanted to mention Laura's question about accountability and holding students accountable. I think that this is still important. We do have to hold students accountable for their actions because we do live in a society that has certain expectations of us as people. But I think that students need to know the expectations from the beginning. I think that it's still important for there to be high expectations, and students like having things expected of them because it means that they can achieve it if you, as an ally, expect it of them. But that means that you have to be coming at it from a place of care and concern, and they have to see you as an ally. So the first few days, especially in my applied classroom, even in my calculus classroom, the first 2 days, we don't do much formal math. We talk about math and we play some fun math games, but we don't start formal lessons. My students, if I can get them to buy into the fact that I'm on their team, we're in this together, then we're going to be great. But if I'm going to spend the whole semester trying to convince student by student that, hey, let's do this, let's go, that's going to be a really tough sell. It has to be done right at the beginning. That's why I applaud you all for going through your practicums. I think practicums are extremely challenging because you don't get to set the tone for the class. When you have your own classroom, just remember those ideas that you want it to set forth right away. You want to set the tone with your students that you're on the same team, that you have expectations of each other, and then you're going to uphold those expectations. And then I wanted to talk about the brownie problem. So much great discussion. Thank you all so much. one thing that I wanted to show is something that, sorry about that. One thing that I wanted to show is something that a student of mine, or a few students of mine, do, and that's draw diagrams and label them. I did this one myself, so it's not as nice as my students, but so if a student starts like this, so they started with these 2/3 and they gave away 3/4, right? So these students are showing that they understand the array model of multiplication of fractions. That's a really high-end thing, but students don't really call it that, and that's okay. I don't need them to. This is part of that content knowledge for teaching that I kind of withhold to myself. But you can see that the students highlighted twice these 6 out of 12 pieces. So their answer is going to be 6 out of 12, or a half. What I want to focus on is Brittany's question of, well, what happened to this 1/3 here? So really, is a student going to say that they gave away a third and then another half? So if they do, that's okay. Then they'll count it out here and they'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 12. And with a diagram, you can see where their answer is coming from. But even without a diagram, I think it's extremely important that we focus on the fact that Brittany asked that question, and that's good. And whenever I'm performing an assessment of student understanding, like what do they know, assessment for learning, and even assessment of learning, I need to have students ask me questions, and I need to be walking around asking questions of students. There's a big focus in my board and in the ministry about using triangulation of evidence. So conversations, observations, and products to get a final mark for a student. So that means that if Brittany is one of my students and she gives me that whole explanation of, well, I gave away this 1/3 and then I gave away this other half, so I think I gave away 5/6. It's totally okay for me to go up to Brittany and say, hey, why did you add a third? And she'll say, oh, because I thought that I gave it away at the beginning. And I can mark that question right, even if it's not right on my answer sheet. That's totally okay. We need to be able to ask students questions and to clarify, because their understanding of the math, of the fraction part of it, is perfect. Like, that's exactly what I wanted. The fact that she was hung up on what happened to that first third, did my dad eat it or did I give it away to somebody? I mean, it's important that they're thinking about these things, and we need to be able to validate that. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next module.